תודה רבה. ואני עכשיו ממשיכה באנגלית. First, what I would like to do is arouse everyone from a little bit of slumber at this time of the day with a slightly provocative picture of the yellow cover of Kabbalah for Dummies. However, the reason I chose this picture was not to trivialize the efforts of the early modern authors of Kabbalistic study guides, but rather to make the point that no sooner than Kabbalah, and especially the Zohar, appeared in print, the impulse to unpack it, reorganize and explicate it was also born, as I will demonstrate in my presentation today. A close examination of how new literary genres of anthologies, digests, and other learning aids reorganized and communicated mystical content of original works, such as the Zohar, helps us understand how writers and readers renegotiated authority and intellectual boundaries in the early modern period. Rabbinic elites accessed Kabbalah directly, resolving textual and conceptual complexities by consulting either an authoritative master or other written sources in print or in manuscript. By contrast, secondary elites represent the social stratum that became empowered by the information explosion and took advantage of new communicative opportunities created by the printed book. Elchanan Reiner's study on Eleazar Altschul's literary and printing activity and Moshe Rossman's discussion of David Darshan highlight the emergence of a new author in Ashkenazi lands. This emerging secondary elite, who worked often as beadles, itinerant preachers, scribes, healers, and teachers, took advantage of advocated the popularization of both halakhic and Kabbalistic studies. Members of this secondary elite simplified complex ideas and produced learning tools in order to enhance the practical dimensions of daily ritual life. Unlike the traditional rabbinic elite, who took a conservative position to what they defined as authoritative and legitimate sources of Jewish knowledge, as pointed out by Moshe Idel in relation to primary and secondary elites in the Middle Ages, the secondary elites proposed a new cultural agenda that emphasized people's right to choose whether to learn, what they wanted to learn, and how they wanted to learn it. The literary innovation of this new group of authors stemmed not from the production of scholastic or theologically complicated treatises, but rather from the textual strategies that they adopted to mediate between elite and popular culture. In this paper, I examined the ways in which an early 17th century author, Yisachar Beer ben Petachia Moshe, reorganized and represented Jewish mystical knowledge for more popular consumption. Yisachar Beer's literary activity offers a context to understanding the impact of three interconnected factors that define the early modern period. One, the technological invention of the printing press and its subsequent impact on the social, cultural, and intellectual development of the pre-period. Two, the rise of a secondary elite for whom printing opened up opportunities to access new areas of intellectual inquiry and who became important cultural agents in reorganizing and representing knowledge to new readers. And three, enhanced mobility, which resulted in the emergence of intellectual networks that facilitated the exchange of ideas between East and West, and at times effaced, while at other times enforced social and cultural boundaries. In what follows, I will focus on Imre Bina, the Kabbalistic dictionary of Yisachar Beer, to highlight the emergence of a new author in Jewish society, whose cultural program was predicated on creating the best literary tools for the effective communication of Kabbalistic language and theosophy. His four extant works, printed in Prague between 1609 and 1610, proposed a new Kabbalistic library, that was uniquely the product of the early modern period and meant to address the intellectual needs of readers who espoused the ideal of independent study at the more popular or beginner's level. The exposition of the literary strategies Yisachar Beer adopts in his works makes an important contribution to understanding the role of the author as authoritative transmitter of earlier traditions. Lastly, this paper hopes to reorient academic focus away from privileging originality in textual production to calling for a greater appreciation of anthological or eclectic compilations. Often dismissed as repetitive, borrowed, and at times merely archival, mosaic works offer a unique insight into how authors negotiated contested ideologies and at the same time worked to renew received traditions by applying innovative literary strategies of recombining textual elements. In the dynamic interface between text, cultural context, and meaning, Yisachar Beer's works refine our understanding of how editorial techniques function as authors reframed old texts and received traditions to express changing ideas, theology, and enhance learning. The lexicon and dictionary comprise prevalent literary genres beginning with the Middle Ages, especially in the field of Jewish philosophy. Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed, for instance, traditionally appeared with Samuel Ibn Tibbon's commentary of foreign words, Perush Milim Hazarot, appended to its printed editions. Specialists who were already conversant with philosophical nomenclature used Ibn Tibbon's lexicon to clarify and affirm their understanding of the guide, whereas for audiences who had little or no recourse to this field of knowledge, the dictionary comprised an indispensable learning aid. Working in Ashkenaz in the early modern period, Mordecai Yaffe could not readily assume that Maimonides' guide, replete with philosophical and scientific terminology, would be easily accessible to the Eastern European reader. In composing Levush Pinat Yikrat, he set himself the task of creatively responding to this challenge by furnishing Ibn Tibbon's original dictionary of philosophical terminology with comprehensive explanations. Kabbalists generated their own dictionaries and lexicons that, much like their philosophical counterparts, functioned as reference tools that readers could consult when they encountered Kabbalistic concepts and terminology that were unfamiliar to them. An early example of a Zoharic lexicon is the anonymous composition Bi'ur Milim Hazarot, discussed in an important article by Boaz Hus, which came to serve as the basis for many subsequent reference aids and anthologies to the Zohar, and is extant today in several manuscript variants and 2 abridged defective printed editions. It is clear that Rabbi Shimon ibn Lavi and Abraham Azulai, 2 prominent 16th century anthologists of the Zohar, both originally from North Africa, were not only familiar with the Bi'ur, but also cited from it extensively in their own works. Other works influenced by the Bi'ur include Yeshaya, which you see on the screen at the moment, written by Isaiah ben Eliezer Chaim of Nitza and printed in Venice in 1637, and Imrei Bina by Yisachar Beer, which I will turn to below. It is of note here that Imrei Bina adopts a very different organizational structure than Yeshaya, thus signaling an important departure from the former layout of the Bi'ur. Hence, while the former orders the foreign and difficult words of the Zohar into the sequence of biblical chapters, which you see just a moment, in a moment, reflecting the original literary structure of the Zohar, Yeshaya, which is on the screen right now, faithfully reproduces the Bi'ur's alphabetical organizational template. And let me just show you, this is the title page of Imrei Bina, and this is Imrei Bina's layout, which follows the order of parashiot. the fact that Imre Bina was reproduced in the Sulzbach edition of the Zohar may suggest that the printers regarded it as a valuable learning tool to accompany the reading of the Zohar. And here on the screen you see one of the first pages of the Sulzbach edition of the Zohar, and Yisachar Beer's Imre Bina is the text at the bottom of the page, and it follows every single parasha, and it's found at the bottom of the page. In Imre Bina, Yisachar Beer offers two types of learning aids to the Zohar. The main part of the book, organized into double columns, constitutes a Zoharic dictionary, which functions simultaneously as a concordance that helps to locate difficult expressions and foreign terms in the place of their original source within the Zoharic text, as well as offer cross-references to other compositions that mention and comment on these, such as Cordoveros Pardes Rimonim, Yehuda Hayatz Minhat Yehuda, and Meir Ibn Gabai's Derech Emunah. A terse second section, inserted just before the colophon, assembles the homiletical material or ma'asiyot of the Zohar and organizes these stories into a list in the format of two running columns that follow the order of parashiyot. Apart from the primary function of the composition to serve as a dictionary and reference guide, Imre Bina from the outset boasts a number of interesting and distinctive features which I will now explore. While this piece was printed a few weeks before his Zoharic anthology, Mekor Chokhmah, it was actually written and designated by Yisachar Beer as his last work. We learn about this in the author's introduction, half of which is devoted to acquainting the reader with the titles and brief content of his other compositions. In the absence of book catalogs and dust jackets, authors' introductions constituted effective tools to advertise and entice the audience to read and purchase their other publications. Entrepreneurial considerations that time and again informed the intellectual commitments of secondary elites are clearly evident in Yisachar Beer's publishing program. In writing Imre Bina, he wished to present readers who, quote, are far removed from the words of the Zohar because they are shut and sealed with a practical key to unlock those mysteries. However, based on his own admission, none of his compositions touch upon the more recondite text of the Zoharic literary corpus, which he, in his own admission, identifies as Sifra Litzniuta, the Idra Rabbah, and Idra Zuta. By admitting to this, he discloses his awareness not merely of the esoteric stratification of the Zohar, but also of his own limitation as author to probe and open up these texts, which, like, quote, Noah's Ark, are close to most, but a few exceptional individuals. One of the most striking literary features of Imre Bina is the insertion of a lengthy Kabbalistic poem, arranged in the acrostic of the author's name. And here we see on the screen the poem, and below the poem, at the bottom of the page, begins his perush of the poem, which I will explain in a moment. As the reader soon finds out, the poem is merely a point of departure for Yisachar Beer to offer an elaborate commentary, which over a few pages sets down the foundation for understanding the main concepts and principles of Kabbalah. In this, he focuses primarily on enumerating the 10 Sefirot and elucidating their basic characteristics and internal dynamics. The principal source that informs the writing of this commentary is the author's first composition, Pitcheya, which he further digests to provide the reader with a primer to the basic concepts of Kabbalah. Pedagogically, the poem, with its brief stanzas, rhymed prose, and acrostic structure, serves to enhance memorization, while the longer commentary elucidates the meaning in a concise and lucid language. The integrated presentation of poetry and narrative commentary demonstrates Yisachar Beer's awareness of the communicative value and pedagogical potential inherent in the fusion of diverse literary genres. Adjusting the form of presentation to the function he assigns to it lends his work originality. Another remarkable feature of Imre Bina is the appearance of a poem in praise of Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which originated in the land of Israel. The poem's stanzas consist of several lines and begin with the name of one of the 10 Sefirot, which are emphasized in larger and bolded font type. The Sefirot are presented in ascending order, with Malchut appearing at the top and Keter at the bottom of the page. Rashbi's name, Bar Yochai, functions as a form of poetic refrain, opening and closing stanzas and connecting one Sephirah conceptually to another. This song, written originally by Rabbi Shimon ibn Lavi in North Africa, became quickly diffused and enjoyed enormous popularity in the land of Israel at the end of the 16th century. However, in Ashkenazi lands, it is Yisachar Beer's Imre Bina that records it for the first time. It can be tentatively suggested that this song was mediated to Rabbi Yisachar Beer via his connection with Shlomi al-Dresnitz, with whom they exchanged several letters at the beginning of the 17th century. Shlomi al-Dresnitz himself traveled from Moravia to Tzafat in order to learn Kabbalah. Or it may have been other cultural agents who similarly participated in the transmission and circulation of ideas through well-established trans-regional networks that shuttled individuals, books, and traditions between Eastern Europe and the land of Israel in the early modern period. In the main section of Imre Bina, Yisachar Beer employs 3 pedagogical strategies to ease the reader's understanding of the foreign terms that crop up frequently in the Zohar. 1 is translation, 2, explication, and 3, reference to other compositions. I will illustrate each of these strategies by an example from the text. Translation of Zoharic words and passages from Aramaic to Hebrew constituted one of the earliest and most effective technical tools to facilitate the exoterization and popularization of the Zohar. Yisachar Beer's repeated use of this technique in Imre Bina ensures crisp, to the point, and easy-to-follow rendition of difficult Aramaic expressions. In explaining the word pekudah, for instance, the Hebrew equivalent is made readily accessible to the reader as mitzvah, and the corresponding page number in the Cremona edition of the Zohar is supplied in brackets. The second strategy affords the highest degree of authorial creativity and freedom, where the writer can define and nuance the depth of Kabbalistic explanation he's ready to deploy. Yisachar Beer resorts to this tool in explaining the Aramaic expression botzina de kardinuta, to which he offers the following commentary. It is a powerful spark which alludes to the negation of perception, for the rational eye cannot see and understand hidden things that are above, just as it is impossible for the eye that gazes to look upon the appearance of a glittering spark, which sparkles with great brilliance and illumination. Here I included Professor Yehuda Liebes's commentary on this word, on botzina de kardinuta, which spans, in fact, several pages, so it's interesting to see how different authors approach explaining difficult words in the Zohar. Reference to additional compositions, the third strategy pursued by Yisachar Beer, expands the Kabbalistic library and broadens the sources that can be studied and consulted by the reader. In employing this particular tool, he not only mentions the title of these works, but at the same time meticulously outlines the exact location of the word under consideration in the original sources. For instance, to elucidate the term itpashim dargin, he says, see its explanation in Minhag Yehuda folio 9 and also in Derech Emunah folio 15, where you will find a slightly different description, but nonetheless, it alludes to the same thing. Clearly, Yisachar Beer is mindful of the diversity of approaches available to explicate Kabbalistic terminology, and he considers it important to alert his readers to these theoretical alternatives. The inclusion of a separate section entitled Ma'asiyot, or stories, a collection of references to Zoharic tales, at the end of Imrei Binah, constitutes the last thematic and structural feature of the book. Here, the author is singularly driven by a desire to provide an easily searchable catalog to the Zohar's Agadic material. Following the biblical parashiyot, he identifies each Zoharic tale, adds a brief synopsis, and provides the corresponding page numbers in the Cremona edition of the Zohar. In Parashat Yitro, for example, Yisachar Beer includes the following story. Story of a man who gathered herbs and had a snake in his hand with which to annihilate a demon in his house. In brackets, I just want to note that he bases himself, in fact, on Maftiach ha-Zohar, written by Moses Galante, which was printed in Venice in 1566. This is the title page of that edition. This is Galante's work. The major difference between these two works is that while Galante brings these Ma'asiyot in Aramaic, Yisachar Beer cites them in Hebrew. So he already takes that extra step of translating it into Hebrew. The presentation of a new section with an ostensibly distinct thematic focus at the end of his Zoharic lexicon constituted a particularly effective reference tool for preachers who would conveniently locate these stories in the Zohar and incorporate them seamlessly into their sermons. That the intellectual impulse to produce study guides to the Zohar did not cease in the 17th century and continued well into the modern period is attested to by the scholarly efforts of Professor Isaiah Tishby, whose arguably most noted work, the Mishnat ha-Zohar, was printed several times in the lifetime of the author. In contrast to his 16th and 17th century predecessors, Tishby aspires to reach out to a largely academic readership and open the Zohar's rich repository of literary, linguistic, and theologic symbolic elements to an audience who would gain access to a primary resource that intersects and dialogues not only with other Kabbalistic compositions, but also with rabbinic literature, medieval philosophy, history, religion, linguistics, and society. The Pritzker Project, launched in 2004, confirmed that wide-scale popularization of the Zohar in the postmodern period demanded a superior translation of the original into a sophisticated English rendition that reflects the literary ambiguities and nuances in the original Aramaic text. An important feature in Danny Ahmed's contribution as translator and commentator was not only to enlist the expertise of a team of scholars who are specialists of Zoharic literature, but also to consult a variety of extant manuscript witnesses, different commentaries to the Zohar, such as Cordovero's Or Yakar, in order to determine the best recension of individual passages. If we adopt Daniel Abrams' contention that the Zohar as book has never existed, and its printing in the 16th century produced merely one edition of the Zohar, rather than offering some kind of urtext, then we might posit that it is in fact an intrinsic and deeply embedded characteristic of this text, that it invites innovation and representation for new generations of readers and interpreters. Just as the protagonists of the Zoharic narrative extol the virtue of producing hermeneutic novelty or chidushim, the work itself survives and becomes received anew by the mediating efforts of each new generation of scholars and interpreters. Therefore, we may conclude that Yisachar Beer's mission to make the Zohar more accessible for future readers will be taken up by new authors in the future who will bring their own unique paradigms, perspectives, and priorities to the project. In the crucible of Daniel Ahmed's scholarly laboratory, the Zohar was refined again to sparkle for many generations to come and provide a foundation and starting point for new explorations, affirming Moses Cordovero's statement that, quote, "This composition is not a work that will vanish. Rather, it will be composed rewritten, and rearranged. Thank you very much.